webinars this month focusing on teen relationship violence. It's going to be a great opportunity to hear from somebody who's been doing this work for a long time and is really one of the leading experts in the country on teen relationship violence and engagement and outreach of teens. And we're so excited to have Juley Fulcher joining us today. You'll see on your screen as we get started today the instructions. I want to thank Jennifer Anderson and Natalia Aguirre, who are actually running the webinar today for our entire national audience. I am actually broadcasting from the San Diego Family Justice Center, where today I'm running the legal clinic here for our restraining order clients. And so I may get interrupted during this, but we're so honored to have Natalia and Jennifer in charge of this whole thing, and we look forward to Juley's presentation today. You'll see on the screen that though everyone is muted, you have the ability to provide questions to us or ask questions during the presentation. Natalia and Jennifer will be taking those questions and will be then providing them to me before the end of Juley's presentation. So we'll take the questions at the end in order to be able to let Juley go through her presentation before we go ahead then and take those at the end. I also want to just acknowledge the importance of providing your information to us, both by registering and then after this presentation responding to us if you want to be able to have access to this presentation. Every presentation that we do is recorded and is posted at familyjusticecenter.org, and our goal is to be able to make that available to people afterwards. As I said, my name is Casey Gwynn. I serve as the president of the Family Justice Center Alliance. On behalf of our CEO, Gail Strack, and our entire team, we're honored to have you join us today. We also want to thank the Verizon Foundation for sponsoring this webinar. Rose Kirk and the whole team at the Verizon Foundation have developed a particular focus this year on teen relationship violence. This is one of their key areas for strategic engagement with both national and local organizations around the country. And the National Family Justice Center Alliance is honored to be working on a project with Verizon around teen relationship violence, particularly developing a toolkit for family justice centers that we hope will be done within the next 60 days or so to really provide family justice centers that haven't done a lot of work with teens a real step-by-step guide on reaching out to the community and developing services for teens in a family justice center. So we want to thank Verizon for their leadership and support in this initiative. We have, oh, sorry, I'm clicking and clicking and clicking, and it's moving too fast for us. We have continuing education credits that we provide because we're a California-based continuing education service provider. We do provide those credits under California law, but professionals in states outside of California can obtain all the information from us and be able to go through a checklist and obtain credit for these courses in other states around the country as well. So we do want to acknowledge that those credits are available, and if you have more questions about that, if you're listening outside of California, you can certainly follow up with the Alliance. We always give a shout out in each webinar we do nationally for our team at the Family Justice Center Alliance. Gail calls it our small but mighty team, but it's our team that works primarily on the national technical assistance and international technical assistance that we do with 80 family justice centers in the United States and about 140 more communities that are developing centers, and then a lot of centers around the country. Gail and Natalia and I and Detective Ruben Gutierrez just returned from Oaxaca, Mexico, where we are developing 21 centers working with President Calderon and the federal government of Mexico right now. So we have a lot of other work we're doing, not just in the United States, but around the world. We also have a direct services team that works at the San Diego Family Justice Center that includes our self-sufficiency program, our clinical intake and client services program, and the legal clinic that I'm actually working in today, which works with victims on restraining orders and other family law-related needs, including immigration legal services, and some services for teens as well. As I mentioned, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for download. We do always like to remind folks that because you've registered for the webinar does not give you access to it later. You do need to be a member of the Family Justice Center Alliance, which you can do at familyjusticecenter.org. Membership is free, so once you apply, we review your application and send you a username and password, and then you're able to access this webinar and hundreds of other webinars that we've recorded in our online resource library. We do want to thank Dr. Juley Fulcher for joining us today. Julie and I have known each other for a number of years, and Julie is the Director of Public Policy and Legal Services for Breaking the Cycle. She's done tremendous work for many years in the field. Julie's been doing the work for over 20 years, and I particularly appreciate kind of her insight and thinking and focus on these issues in so many ways. Julie's a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center. She was recognized in a variety of ways for her excellent work when she was at Georgetown. She, as I mentioned, has her doctorate in social psychology from Johns Hopkins University and serves on the faculty part-time in the Women's Studies Department at Georgetown. She's admitted to the State Bar of the District of Columbia, and she's the chair of the Board of Directors of the D.C. Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She's done a lot of work in the domestic violence field in general, both locally and nationally. She's worked with the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence as well. She's testified before Congress, and I know is right now very involved in the reauthorization of VAWA, which is quite a battle going on in Washington right now, and we all appreciate her support and advocacy and work there. She's been widely published, done a lot of writing, and is incredibly well respected in the field, works on the editorial board of the Sexual Assault Report and on the board of advisors for the Domestic Violence Report. And today we're particularly interested in all of her expertise and background in this whole area around teen relationship violence and her work with Breaking the Cycle. So Julie, welcome. It's great to have you with us today, and I'm going to turn over the presentation to you, and Natalia will turn over the controls to you. So welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Casey. Good morning to everyone, and good afternoon if you happen to be joining us from the East Coast. I am going to be talking today about how it is that you incorporate services for teen victims of dating violence into your Family Justice Center model. I'm having difficulty making the slide go forward. Don't know if someone can do that. Thank you. I'm with an organization called Break the Cycle. If you're unfamiliar with us, we work nationally to address the issue of dating violence in young people between the ages of 12 and 24. So basically middle school, high school, college age, although we reach out to quite a lot of young people who are not in school. We have offices in Washington, D.C., in Los Angeles, and in Austin, Texas. The D.C. office, in addition to doing a lot of national work and technical assistance around the country, we also have direct services for the District of Columbia, hence my title, Public Policy and Legal Services. I do want to also give a little note that you'll be seeing lots of pictures of young people throughout my presentation, all of whom are peer leaders or former peer leaders of Break the Cycle who like very much that their pictures end up in my presentation. So today, how to help teen victims of dating violence, and really thinking through how you can be teen friendly, and that is the goal, because if you aren't teen friendly, they aren't going to come forward and they aren't going to work with you. I'm assuming that everyone has a basic understanding of teen dating violence. Can somebody move it forward again? Thank you. So I'm not going to go a great deal into what is teen dating violence. I mean, the simple answer to that is it's everything you know about domestic violence. It's just done in the context of their world, which in some ways is different and in some ways is the same. So our objectives are going to be to understand how the laws are going to impact a provider's ability to work with youth, to recognize the legal barriers that face youth when they try to access services, to identify confidentiality and mandatory reporting laws and issues, and to understand safety planning and methods for being a teen-friendly provider. Can we move forward again?
Julie, if you would like to try, you can click on the actual slide, and then from there you should be able to move forward with your arrows. And I'll go ahead and take control if you can't do that again, but you should be working now.
Okay, I'll try it again. It wasn't doing before. Okay, so the real issue we have to think about is what is their experience with dating violence? You know, how does it play out in their world? First, we need to note that there are limited resources for young people in general, not just around this issue, but in general for all of their needs that they might have. This may be their first relationship or one of their first relationships, and so they don't have the perspective necessarily of what relationships are supposed to look like. Obviously, they're dealing with their own social dynamics. People often refer to the peer pressure that happens in younger years, which I absolutely agree does occur, but point out that we as adults also will succumb to peer pressure quite a lot. They may have strained relationships with the adults in their lives. Cognitively and developmentally, this is the time when they are developing their autonomy, when they are becoming a person in and of themselves. And part of that process is kind of rejecting the adults around them sometimes so that they can establish, I'm me, I'm different, you know, I have my own perspective. And that can sometimes mean they're going through a rough time with the adults in their lives. We also need to recognize that while all victims of domestic violence have difficulty avoiding their abuser, teens may be particularly in a bad spot. Their abuser may go to school with them. So the only way to avoid the abuser is to not go to school. The abuser may live near them, and they aren't able to move somewhere else and keep their address hidden and things like that. These are, of course, very difficult things for adults, but it's practically impossible for young people. Okay. Oops. Went too far. There we are. The big obstacles that we're going to talk about, confidentiality, which is identified as the #1 concern of young people when it comes to accessing any kind of services. Their general lack of trust for adults or particular kinds of service providers. The lack of targeted services that are really designed to meet their needs. Confusion about the law. Of course, this is true of all adults as well. But for young people, they may be particularly unable to understand what their rights are and what the law says. And their reluctance to involve police or prosecution. Same thing with adults. It happens for teens, but it is a big obstacle to get over. Okay, so let's talk about what teens are thinking when they're trying to think about, you know, how to reach out and get help. Here's an example that we see quite oftenly. They don't take me seriously. As young people, they don't feel that they are respected as individual people, and that sometimes adults can be kind of dismissive. So they think maybe the adults won't believe them. And I noted that this is especially true if the abuser is an adult. We find in our work that on average the abusers are 4 years older than the victims. And we have definitely handled quite a number of cases where we are representing a minor whose abuser and dating partner is in their 30s, 40s, and even 50s. So important to recognize that dynamic. They think adults will dismiss the relationship or the abuse as not that serious. If you've ever used or heard the term puppy love, you know what I'm talking about. It's when adults are thinking that their relationships aren't really the same as adult relationships. And as I mentioned before, this is the developmental stage where you are trying to establish autonomy. So you are trying to demonstrate to your parents and to other adults that you've got it under control, that you can handle yourself, that you don't need their advice and, you know, all of those things. So they're obviously going to be in a situation with this as well where, you know, their whole goal in life is to show that they can handle things, and they're going to want to try to do that as well with this situation. Here's another one we hear quite a bit. I don't trust adults. A big one, teens may live in communities where police are seen as the enemy, or other kinds of service providers may be seen as the enemy. And in fact, they may have actually, you know, seen situations that tend to justify their beliefs. So, you know, we need to recognize that, particularly in communities of color. Teens generally believe that adults will break their confidences. We have already mentioned that confidentiality is going to be the #1 thing. So they often feel like they can't go to an adult with a problem confidentially. And, you know, they may have even been abused at the hands of an adult, which is obviously going to undermine the trust that they may have for all adults. I don't want my parents to know. We hear this all the time. And there's a lot of reasons for it. You know, like adults, they don't want to have to share private information about their relationship. You know, who does? Who wants to go and tell those things to their to service providers? Who of us as adults wants to go tell all those details to our own parents? So recognize that. They may be using alcohol or illegal drugs with the abuser, or somehow it's related to the abuse, and so they're scared to tell because they don't want to reveal that in fact they have been using substances like this. They may not want to reveal the extent of their sexual activity, or they're embarrassed to discuss any kind of sexual abuse or coerced sexual activity that's occurring in the abusive relationship. Again, how many of us as adults want to go tell those details to our own parents? And so, you know, when sex is a part of this, they're going to want to be secretive. And I noted as well, gay and lesbian kids are in a particularly difficult situation if they are not out to their parents. The whole sort of, if I reveal this abusive relationship, I'm going to have to reveal that I'm gay, can be a huge barrier for young people. The fear that our parents will react badly, will react poorly. And the first one here is huge. Young people may lose their independence or freedom if they tell about the abuse. Unfortunately, we're doing this in a webinar format. When I do this live and in person, I always ask all the adults in the room, usually parents, if your child came to you and said, I'm being abused in a dating relationship, would you in fact ground them and not let them out of the house until they're 30? And most parents, that is going to be their reaction. We want to protect our kids. And so when you hear of this, you are likely to actually take away some of the independence and freedom of the young person. And so that's an important aspect to consider. We don't want to fall into a pattern of essentially blaming the victim because, the fact that we're going to now tell them they can never date sort of, sends the message that somehow their activity in the dating created this problem. We often see a situation where the abuser is an intimate partner of the teen's mother or a family friend. In other words, the abuser is partnered with the teen's mother, partnered with someone that's a friend of the family, and is also engaging in an ongoing relationship with the teen. We see this all too frequently, and obviously, there's a fear that the parents will react badly to find out about that. And we know that young people who are growing up in abusive homes are more likely to be in abusive relationships as they grow up. I'm always quick to point out that the vast majority of young people who grow up in abusive homes are able to negotiate relationships quite well as adults and do not turn into child abusers or anything like that. But it does increase the chances that they're going to be in their own abusive relationships. And so it's not unusual to see that a young person who comes to us for help is seeing domestic violence happen at their own home. And it may not be the most safe place to talk about their own situation. Yeah, I don't get along with my parents. It just happens. Hopefully relationships get mended as they grow up. But they may be going through that difficult time that I mentioned. Sometimes you're dealing with young people who go to a boarding school or they're away for some sort of, internship or exchange program or something like that. And so, they're really not even, day-to-day dealing with their parents. They may have moved out to be with their abuser. And a lot of times that was a very contentious move. That was a sort of abuser against parents kind of situation where the young person, picks the partner, or at least that's the perception. And, following up that the abuser may have very intentionally isolated supportive adults from the young person. So they don't really have those supportive adults in their life. And the bottom one, parents may have kicked them out for being gay, for getting pregnant. We've seen all sorts of things where parents have kicked their kids out of the home. Yes, that in of itself is a big problem that needs to be dealt with, but it may mean that going immediately to the parents about abuse is not the first step. This is the one that every victim of domestic violence feels at some point. Nobody can help me. This abuser is using all sorts of tactics to make sure that the abuse is going to continue, and others just aren't able to stop it. They may fear that an adult just isn't capable of protecting them from the abuser, and the abuser's friends or the gang that the abuser is part of. And we have had a number of cases, both in Washington, D.C. and in Los Angeles, in our offices, where the abuser does use their friends or fellow gang members as part of the violence and creates a very, very lethal situation. May not understand that the law is on their side and that they actually have some legal options. Young people tend to think, there's nothing out there for them. They've sort of grown up with the idea that they don't have rights, that they don't have the ability to engage in the system, that that's an adult thing. And of course, we're always going to see things like an abuser who's threatened to harm their family if they tell, things like that. This is a really difficult one when it occurs. The parents like the abuser. They know the person that they are dating, and they like them. We have actually had cases where the abuser is financially supporting the family and or the victim. So if the victim, is pregnant, it may be very likely the abuser, is providing some sort of financial support, and the parents want to make sure that continues. We've had cases where the abuser is actually paying the family's rent, and where the parents actually oppose the minor's attempt to get a protection order because they wanted to make sure their rent would continue to be paid. And there's always those issues of, how will it look to other people if they find out that this is occurring to my child. Okay, so that gives us a sense of what young people are thinking, and I just want to point out, and this is true, throughout the presentation, young people are not a monolith. Young people are as diverse as adults are, and so I'm not able to tell you what all young people are thinking. I can only give you some trends. But recognize that every young person is a different person that's dealing with a unique, different abusive situation that needs to be addressed in that very one-on-one way. So let's think about what are the goals of the services we're trying to provide. Well, I usually talk about the first three goals being the goals of victim service providers: safety, healing, and providing that young person with choices that will enable them to have a violence-free future. That's the, we want this to happen long-term, not just stop the current abuse. The fourth one is something that the young person may or may not actually want, but also can be an important part of their healing, and is certainly the goal of police and prosecutors who are involved in these family justice centers. So we need to recognize and talk about it, and that is justice for the victim, accountability for the perpetrator. So with those goals in mind, we need to think about how we reach them. The primary supports that we think of for domestic violence generally are not going to be available to teens or are not nearly as accessible for them. So we have things like shelter and confidential housing, which may be extremely difficult to locate. Most of the time, the only shelters that are going to be able to take a minor are those that deal with runaway and homeless youth, because you have to go through certain kinds of certification of your shelter in order to be able to shelter young people. Mental health services, counseling, support groups, these may not be accessible, and if they are accessible, they may not be targeted to their unique needs. Medical care, sexual health issues, legal services, all very hard to get to. Here are the limits that we think of when we think of service delivery. Age of majority. When we think about what's the age of majority, most of us go straight to 18. It's actually different in different states, and it's also different for different purposes, and we're going to get into that. Shelter is a limit. The ability of the minor to consent to services. This is, the minor, not the parent who's consenting to the services, and that may not be possible. The privacy of their records as a minor, your records do not have the same level of privacy that adults might have, and the issue of mandated reporting, which is going to interfere with young people reaching out to get help. So I wanted to come back to that issue of rights, and I kind of mentioned that young people don't have rights. That's not true. They do have some rights, but the constitutional protections that we think of as our, given rights as citizens of the United States are not broadly applicable to minors as well. What we have instead is largely the parents holding the rights over the children. And this actually comes from our long history of law that considered wives and children to be property. And much of the law that exists around children still sort of treats them as the property of their parents. The parents can raise them the way they want to. The parents can choose the religion for their kids. The parents can choose the school for their kids. It's the parents' right. However, minors do have rights to access critical services without their parents' knowledge or consent. And state laws are going to vary about how they balance these two issues. The parents' right to control what's happening to their kids and know what's happening to their kids versus the minor's right to get things that are absolutely essential without dealing with their parents, if that's a problem. This is going to be true sort of across the board when we're talking about their right to access services. It's going to impact the ability of adult service providers to respond and deliver those services. It's also going to, interfere to some extent with early intervention and prevention education because, of course, parents have the right to consent or not consent to certain kinds of education of their kids in schools or otherwise. So I mentioned that there are exceptions to the age of consent where minors can consent without the parents. Examples of exceptions that occur: medical emergencies. So your child gets hurt at school and is rushed to the hospital, and the young person can make a decision about their medical emergency, how to be treated if their parents are not present. If we have a young person who is married, emancipated, or a mature minor, emancipation doesn't even exist in all states, and oftentimes you are only emancipated for certain purposes, like you're emancipated for the purpose of getting a job, and so recognize that that limits things, but generally a married minor gets most of the rights of an adult. And there may be statutory authorization for minor consent to certain kinds of services. Many states will have the ability for minors to get access to contraceptives, STI, both testing and services, prenatal care, mental health services, substance abuse treatment. Again, this is something you have to figure out in your local area because whether or not your state allows this consent and what age the minor has to be to get these services is going to vary greatly. So even though they may give access to minors for contraceptives, it may be only for minors who are 16 and older. And so you need to be very aware of what those are. Also note that sometimes minor is allowed to consent to services, but parental notification is still required. That can be a real barrier for a lot of young people, and important to know what that situation is so that a young person doesn't go into it and is blindsided by parental notification. And one thing I want to mention as well under that is if it's medical services, and even if it doesn't require parental notification, if it's occurring on the parent's insurance plan, they're going to find out when they get the insurance bill information. So do they have access to the law and access to the courts? We oftentimes will use the civil system in domestic violence to deal with things like restraining orders, protection orders, emergency protection orders, custody and visitation orders. I will say that approximately half of all of our teen clients have kids of their own. We actually had a client here. She was 20 years old with 4 kids. I couldn't imagine that life, but it is the situation for some. And, you know, housing protections, immigration, restitution, all those things may or may not be accessible to a minor. Criminal system is also going to be different. We think of that as an option for abuser accountability, for, you know, some sort of rehabilitation or change of the abuser's behavior. And, you know, the situation could end up in juvenile court instead of adult court if the abuser is a minor. So things like criminal punishment, court supervision, court order treatment may be very different for young people. There's actually a lot of scenarios where, you know, a judge very much wants to order a young abuser into some sort of batterer intervention program, but such program does not exist in their community. And putting them into an adult batterer intervention program is likely to be counterproductive and you know, problematic for the young person. An interesting situation that we had to figure out around protection orders for Washington, D.C. is do minors have the ability to sue? Because filing for a protection order in a civil court system is actually, you know, bringing a lawsuit against someone. And so you not only have to look at and deal with the protection order statute, but the overarching statute in your community around whether minors are able to sue on their own. Sometimes it has to be, you know, a parent involved. Sometimes some other adult can sue on their behalf. But we need to understand what those things are. And I noted on here the relationship requirements. Not all states cover dating violence yet. A lot of young people are still going to fall under categories of living together or child in common, but a great many of them will be cut out of the possibility of bringing suits if they only have what we call a dating relationship. There's also the really big question of, can you sue a minor? And if so, how do you hold that minor accountable? Even if it's very clear that your minor client can request a protection order against an abuser and, you know, their relationship is covered, there may still be a problem in the law where minors cannot be sued and held responsible for those kinds of behaviors. And so this is a very complicated issue when the crimes are committed by minors. So as I said, each state's going to define protection orders differently. Some states actually put in their statute how old you have to be, minimum age, to petition for a CPO. Others are silent as to the issue, but you know, often are interpreted to be a requirement that you are 18, or alternatively, every judge makes that decision independently, and so it's a luck of the draw on which judge you end up in front of. Dating relationships, can the minor petition on their own behalf? Can you get a CPO against the minor? If you are getting a CPO against a minor, does that process happen in a juvenile court or an adult court? You know, can they use the DV courts that we've created or not? And even if they can get a protection order against a minor, is there actual enforcement ability? Is there an ability to prosecute that minor for, you know, failing to do as the protection order says? And it may not be the case. So let's talk again about the confidentiality issue. I said that teens will often cite confidentiality as their biggest concern when choosing whether or not to seek help. And this is true not just of dating violence, but other kinds of help as well. And they're concerned about their parents knowing. They may be concerned about their peers finding out. And they are generally aware that mandatory reporting exists. They may not know the intricacies of the law. We as adults tend not to know the intricacies of the law, but they know that that issue is floating around out there. And it is important when talking to a young person that you're trying to assist that they know whether that conversation that you are having is confidential or not, and they need to know in advance whether you are a mandatory reporter or not, because they need to be able to make that decision on their own. Just as it's the case with adults, by letting that information go beyond what the victim expected can end up in deadly results. And so we need to make sure the young person knows what they're getting into. And obviously, your profession or your role in an organization may very well determine that you are a mandatory reporter, or your role or your profession may determine that you are, you have to keep everything confidential, or that you are, confidential service provider. Sometimes victim advocates have a higher degree of confidentiality that they're allowed to have. And so we need to be very clear on where we are as individuals. So when we're talking about confidentiality, we have to think of it very broadly. First of all, as I've mentioned, you need to know what the laws are in your state. What are the requirements there? What is mandatory reporting? Who is a mandatory reporter? How do they have to report? Under what circumstances? Who is a confidential service provider, even of youth? But you also need to really look at your organizational procedures, both in your independent organization and within your Family Justice Center. What is our procedure going to be around confidentiality with minors and our procedure around, mandatory reporting? I can tell you, for example, at Break the Cycle, because we provide legal services, we actually have the ability to have confidentiality with our clients. However, we would be mandatory reporters if we're out giving a presentation in some classroom. So we, have very clear procedures about when we are in confidentiality mode and when we are mandatory reporters. And then there's a lot of non-legal issues that are going to come up here when thinking about confidentiality. A really important question is, who do you represent? Who are you working for? Is it the minor who's being abused, or is it the parent of the minor who's being abused? As you might imagine, their desires and needs may differ. And so you need to think those things through. Similarly, is your procedure going to be, we always notify the parent, whether or not that's legally required in our state. You need to figure that out. You need to know where you stand on those issues and have it be really clear. As I mentioned, mandatory reporting, it differs by state. There are also, federal law basically just requires the state to figure out when to be mandatory reporters, and state by state they define it differently. Most states use the term child abuse as the reportable offense, but then you have to really look at how they define child abuse. For example, in some states, child abuse is only abuse by a parent or caregiver. So if someone who is not a parent or caregiver is abusing this young person, it does not fall under the definition of child abuse. State law is going to tell you what your reporting obligations are, and it's going to establish, reporting procedures. You need to be prepared if, in fact, you are a mandatory reporter of where to go and what's going to happen. I know if you're doing this work out there, and if you've ever been in that situation of mandatory reporting, you know that what's in the law may be very different from what happens in reality. For example, it's not unusual for somebody to try to report a dating abuse situation as child abuse and have, child protection agency say, we don't deal with that. Even though the law may cover it, they'll say, we don't deal with that. It may be the case that even though someone is 16 or 17 and still considered a child under your child abuse laws, that your child protection agency will put your case to the very back of the pile because they want to deal with the young ones before they deal with someone who's 16 or 17 who's going to age out of the system anyway very soon. So we've talked about whether dating violence qualifies as child abuse in your state, and it may not. You have to also remember that there may be injury reporting laws. Like, for example, it's very common, gunshot wound has to be reported. And also duty to warn issues that may arise if you are, for example, a counselor, therapist, psychologist, who's working with someone who you feel is, imminently going to cause harm to someone else, you may be in a duty to warn situation. And that may be true even if you are dealing with the quote-unquote victim, because sometimes there is retaliation. It's not always a nice, easy, clear situation. And you need to understand that reporting requirement well enough to explain it to a minor, to explain it in that very basic language so that the minor understands what's reporting, what's informed consent, those kinds of things. And note that even if you do a mandatory report, your job isn't over. You still have somebody who's in a bad situation who needs help, who may or may not be getting what they need from Child Protective Services, and so your relationship with that young person should not end. So let's think a little bit about how we work with teens. You need to prepare to work with a teen client. You cannot go into that situation having only served adults and expect to do things the same way. There are some differences despite all the similarities. You need to know who your client is, know where they're coming from, what their level of understanding is, those kinds of things. You need to think about how you are going to meet with your client, because there's a lot of issues that arise. And you have to think about how you're going to assess their safety needs, because safety plans are going to be different for young people. Still the same idea, but maybe different. So how do I prepare to serve a teen? First of all, do you know who in your community is going to be a good referral for other kinds of services that the young person might need? Very often the case is that someone who's experiencing domestic or dating violence has a lot of other things on their plate, and you need to know where to send them. And I will tell you right now that a great many service providers that you may rely on may very well have a policy against serving minors. Also, many that will serve minors may not really have the kinds of services that are going to help a minor. And so you need to make sure you have services that you can refer to who really are going to do what needs to be done. Transportation. Often an issue with adults. We always talk about the problem, especially in rural areas. It's almost always going to be an issue for young victims of dating violence. They very rarely are going to have a car or even access to their parents' car to come and do this kind of thing. You need to know what the school policy is for this young person, assuming they are in school, and you know, a great many young people that you might experience may not be in school for a variety of reasons. But those who are in school, you need to understand what their school policy is. If you get a protection order for this young person, is the school actually going to enforce it on campus? You know, are they going to require the abuser to switch to another class or move the abuser's locker or anything like that in order to make sure that the protection order is carried out? Do they have any disciplinary procedures in the school that might be useful in getting the abuse to stop? We know that there are lots of ways to try to address domestic violence, not always through the legal system, and sometimes a school policy can get to the issues. You should also know that it's not uncommon to need to move your client to another school for safety purposes. They're just not going to be safe at the school they're at. And so, you know, how does the school deal with those kinds of things? Make sure you're aware of your client's medical needs, and also know the relevant laws and policies like the ones that we have been discussing, so that you don't sound like you're, you know, making it up as you go and, you know, I've got to figure that out. They need to know that they are meeting with someone who has the answers in order to get that trust. You need to know your teen. What are the preconceptions that your teen client, young person who's experiencing abuse, have about your profession? What do they think about police officers? What do they think about psychologists? What do they think about social workers? What do they think about people who work in a battered women's shelter? Those preconceptions may be different from adults in your community. And so you need to really recognize where they're coming from, what they think, so that you can address that right away. But also, big one, you need to ask yourself, what are my preconceptions about teens? And we all have them, and they are going to show through when we try to help a young person. So we need to sort of check our own preconceptions at the door. We need to approach a young person like any other person who is coming in for services, and treat them with the respect that we would offer to an adult. Let's talk about what you do when you actually meet the teen. First and foremost, you do need to discuss that issue of confidentiality. It's on their mind. It should be on your mind. You need to let them know everything you say to me is confidential, or, you know, I'm a mandatory reporter, and if you tell me about abuse, you know, this kind of abuse, I'm going to have to report it. You need to discuss that issue so they know what to expect. You also need to explain your role, what role you play, what you can do to help, and maybe what you can't do, but, you know, that you can refer or whatever. Make that very clear. and make them also understand whether or not that young person is your client or whether their parent is going to be your client. What is your role? Are you there to serve what that minor wants and needs, or are you taking other people's concerns into account? Obviously, you need to establish rapport the same way that you need to do it with any other person that you might experience. Age doesn't matter. Use teen-friendly language. This is a little bit difficult. First of all, you need to understand their language because they are going to speak their language, and you need to understand what they're talking about, what they're telling you, what happened. If they use a word or phrase that you don't understand, stop and ask. We have to do that. But the better we are at actually learning that language and knowing it before someone walks through our door, the more we're going to be able to provide help. Do we use that language that we learn? Probably not, or with limitations is what I'm going to say. As adults, we sound silly using some of the terminology of young people, and they automatically are sort of going to lose trust in us if we start using that language. But a thing that is teen-friendly language is to not use legalese, to not talk in really big words. Their education is, not quite there yet. And so it's helpful for you to think about how do I explain this to somebody in simpler language. So teen-friendly interviewing, the language I've already addressed, tone. They know when we're thinking bad things about them or not taking them seriously or taking control and telling them what to do. And we need to make sure our tone is, as we would treat any other adult. We have to ask the questions. You can't be scared to ask the questions just because they're a young person. Are you having sex with him or her? And by the way, got to check that definition. As was mentioned at the beginning, I teach at Georgetown in undergrad, and I will tell you every semester I ask the question, and apparently oral sex is not sex. So ask the questions, be direct. And you need to ask the questions in a way that they feel like they're going to be able to answer. Did he rape you? Nobody's really going to feel comfortable answering that question. Did you want to have sex? That's a different story, and you can get to what you need in other ways. So manage your interview as you would manage any other interview. You've got to keep them on track, but you've also got to, make sure it's very clear that you are listening and you care. Length of interview. Generally, your older adolescents can be interviewed for, a lengthy period of time without too much problem. But do remember that young people have a shorter attention span. And so you should try to keep your interviews shorter. Under an hour is generally going to be best. Yes, that means multiple interviews. And if you're dealing with a younger person, say 12, you might even have to stick to a half hour. And always be professional. Do not talk down to them just because they are young. You're a professional who's helping them. Safety needs, you do it the same way you do it with adults. Find out what their current situation is, conduct lethality assessment, and create a comprehensive safety plan. Now, their situation may be a little bit different. You need to really think about the situation with school, with how they have to use transportation. Do they use buses? And, what kinds of friends are also giving the victim a hard time because they're, reporting this. You really need to get into things that you might not have asked with an adult. And make sure that you're dealing with that. What are your clients' goals? It's got to be about what they're trying to accomplish. There may be times when you think what they're trying to accomplish is ill-advised. There may be times when you have to go directly against it with respect to mandatory reporting, but we need to know what they want, where they're coming from, what are their needs, what are their priorities, because their priorities might not be getting criminal charges filed. And so make sure you know where they're coming from. You might have to then, talk to them about why that's, not the best course of action, what you think would be a better course of action, and offer those things. But first find out where they're coming from. The resources that the client has, what do they have available to them? Do they have access to a car? Do they have access to a bus pass? What do they have that could be useful? You have to determine your client's level of functioning. You may have a client who is less mature or less cognitively developed who you have to work with in a different way. Everything stays the same, but also you have to be more explanatory and more understanding. And assess your client's current mental state. We're all used to somebody who comes in frazzled and really, really upset beyond being helpful. And so we need to work with them the same way we would work with an adult. There is not a lethality assessment in existence that is specific to teens. We are hopeful that is going to change and that we will have a lethality assessment that is specific to them. But for now, we work with the lethality assessment that exists for adults on the assumption that these same risk factors are going to create a problem. You do have to discuss the serious risk of injury or death with your client. Remember when you were young, you were invincible. Nothing that bad could ever happen to you. And so you need to make sure it's clear that this can happen, it does happen. I'm concerned for your safety. I want to make sure that you are, not at risk for some horrible harm, and we're going to work together to make sure that doesn't happen. You're going to ask for the same things. Has the abuser threatened to kill you? Is there extreme jealousy involved? Has there been strangulation involved in the abusive behavior? Is there stalking going on? And remember that an abuser uses what is available to them in order to create that power and control. Young people live by technology. Many of them don't even use the phone anymore to make phone calls. We have clients who would rather text us than talk to us on the phone. And so you need to recognize that in terms of working with the young person, but you need to recognize it in terms of the kind of abuse they might be experiencing. They might be receiving horrible text messages and horrible things being put on their Facebook page, or somebody has created a dummy Facebook page that looks like it's the victim, but it's really not. It's the abuser, and they're putting all sorts of horrible things up there. Other people may be now involved. The abuser may have, brought in friends who will also help with the, bad-mouthing online or sending horrible texts and things like that. So stalking, obviously we're worried about the kind where they follow you around, but we're also worried about the kind where they're using technology to understand where you are and what you're doing. And for those of you who aren't aware, the majority of teens do text 24/7. You may not think they're texting in the middle of the night. They are, generally. alcohol or drug abuse, weapons involved, the violence is increasing, recent breakup, all the same stuff that we're used to using, we need to ask about. All right. Okay. So safety plan, individualized set of action strategies and resources that addresses safety both during an abusive relationship and after leaving the relationship. We all know that a safety plan is a moving document. It should be constantly updated based on, what the situation is currently. And so when you're creating that safety plan, you have to think about preventing future violence. You have to think about how they will handle an incident of violence if it occurs. What is their way to respond? Is it 911? Is it, I will, the abuse always happens on the bus, so I will tell, I will scream out that it's happening on the bus and ask someone to, dial 911. Whatever that's going to be, you need to go through that. And you need to talk to them about safety after an incident. The violence has already occurred. It's not occurring anymore. What are you going to do, though, to make sure that it, doesn't happen again in the immediate future? And you need to talk about safety if this person is in the process of leaving a relationship. They need to understand ways that they can both communicate that they are leaving the relationship and also make sure they don't, end up getting pulled back in through various things. So a moving document should be addressed every time you meet with them, and more often than that if you can. And this is, sort of the overall focus that you need to have if you want to provide teen-friendly services. Focus on empowering that young person. We use the empowerment model for young persons the same way we do with adults. They have lost power and control to this abuser, and they need to regain it. We need to make sure that we're providing them resources that are valuable to them. We need to educate this young person the same way we would an adult about what their rights are, what the law can do, what the law can't do. We need to give them tools to help themselves. Our immediate response with young people is always to come in and handle it. And yes, you are there to help handle some of the things, but ultimately you are not there 24/7. You need to give them tools to help themselves. You need to empathize with their situation, and you need to avoid judgment or blame. We know this when we work with victims of domestic violence, but it may crop up in ways you weren't expecting when you're dealing with a young person, because you are going to hear about things that they've done that you think are stupid and they should not have done, because they're still figuring things out and they may not always have the best judgment. But we need to not judge that or blame them for those decisions that may not have worked out well. So you're all working together. That's what a Family Justice Center is about. We talk about the need to build a whole community response. Everybody has got to be thinking about what these young people are going through and what they may need. We need to involve the schools. We need to involve any kind of youth centers and youth programs. And we need to get all the existing adult-focused programs to help us respond. I'm putting things up here that I know you know, or I expect you know. So working in a collaborative relationship, but things we need to remember, it's always a process. It never ends. You don't create a collaboration and then that's it. You're building the collective empowerment of the community is what you're doing. You're building participation. You're building leadership. You're building leadership among young people. Young people do not want to hear anything adults have to say in general. They want to hear it from another young person. And they are far more likely to confide in a peer than they are to confide in an adult when it comes to dating violence. And so we need to make sure those peers are equipped with the ability to help respond. We need to, get a sense of power out of our work together. We obviously need patience, perseverance, and mutual respect for everyone that we are working with, both organizations and individuals. As I said, mobilization is not the goal by itself. It is a process. It's never going to be one person deciding we're going to mobilize. It's not even going to be a dedicated few who mobilize. It's got to be everybody. It's not imposed on other people, and of course, no miracles overnight. So when thinking about building our capacity to work with young people, I've covered a lot of things, but what it basically comes down to is you're going to think about yourself. What do I need to do in order to prepare myself to properly interact with these young people? I need to build my knowledge, build resources, build my skills. I need to be motivated to do this, because if I don't want to work with these young people, it's not going to work. I need to build my own personal capacity. And we also need to specifically look at the capacity of the organization and the capacity of the Family Justice Center Collaborative itself. We need to make sure that the structures are in place. Are you going to divide it up in a way that, you can talk confidentially to these people but not to these people? Are you going to be located in a place that's actually accessible to young people? Usually that's going to mean public transportation. We will often give our clients metro passes because they don't have the money. So, we will give them the way to get to us. Everybody has to be willing. The organization has to be willing, and it has to express that willingness. Think about what your office looks like. Is it something that would be teen-friendly? You got to think about that. What are your resources as an organization? What can you bring to the table? What activities are you going to do that are part of serving these young people? It may not be enough just to sit and wait for them to come to you. You're going to have to do some outreach in the community. And you're going to have to think about your processes. How do you respond to all of the different things that might occur? So this is something that you have to put concerted effort into. It's not something that can be done overnight, but if done, can make your Family Justice Center incredibly more valuable to the community if you're able to do this with respect to young people. So your successful collaboration is going to have all these things involved: action plans, stakeholders, shared vision, expertise, teamwork, open communication, motivated partners, sufficient means, and overall trust of each other. I've definitely been in situations where the various partners do not trust each other with respect to working with young people and approach it with very different philosophies about how to work with young people. You got to find ways to get over that if you're going to be in the same work together. That is the end of what I have to present to you. I'm more than happy to take questions now, as well as any kind of questions that you might have in the future. Break the cycle, technical assistance and providing answers and guidance to others is a big part of what we do. I'm located here in the Washington, D.C. office. You can certainly contact me with questions, and I can also put you in touch with others in my office who may be able to help you with other things. Our website, breakthecycle.org, does have a lot of things that are targeted to adults and how adults can work better on these issues, including things like model school policies around dating violence. Loveisrespect.org is the place to send young people to both learn more about the issue and to get help, because it is the portal to the dating abuse helpline, which can also be reached by text and instant message, which are often the preferred forms of communication. And of course, you can find us on Facebook. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's great, Julie. Thank you very much for your presentation. We have a lot of questions, and our time is relatively short, so I'll try to move quickly into the questions that have come in. There's a number of questions around your awareness about models for teen or youth battering intervention programs. A number of folks trying to implement programs around offender accountability. Are you aware of any battering intervention programs for teens who have used violence? And if so, how would they kind of access those?
Okay. There are a couple that have cropped up who may or may not be something that is court-ordered. I will tell you that we were doing it for a while for the District of Columbia till we lost funding. The way we approached it was to combine the cognitive behavioral model with David Wolf's work on working with young people and some things that come from the Duluth model to try to pull that together. We worked on the basis of having, of course, a pair who would be leading it, male and female. We actually sometimes had several folks who were in the room, including we would incorporate sometimes college-age students who work with us, who understand it, who are great peer leaders, who can get in there and as part of the discussion sometimes be heard a little bit more. So what's out there is people sort of trying to make it up, and there are very, very few of them. They tend to crop up and then go away. So it's a big need. It's an important need. We all have our concerns about batter intervention being the answer because we know about the recidivism. Break the Cycle is of the belief that young abusers may be more likely to change. There may be less recidivism with young people because they are still figuring things out and would respond well. We did have success with the way we were doing it in D.C., but like I said, not doing it anymore.
And were you doing it in kind of a Duluth model psychoeducational group approach?
We were incorporating a lot of the activities and things around, from David Wolf as well. We did have people who were in the groups who were court-ordered. We did a group that was actually a mixed group, some that were court-ordered and some that were just sort of referred by a school principal or something. And we've done a group where everybody was court-ordered.
Okay. There's a number of other questions here I'll try to jump into. One says, I work in a prevention program, and I am developing a curriculum that deals with teen dating violence, intervention, and prevention through healthy relationship building. Do you have an evidence-based program that addresses healthy relationship building that I may use as a reference tool? I've searched evidence-based clearinghouses and have noticed that this is difficult to cite, particularly related to prevention techniques.
And you are correct. There is not a lot of sort of good research and evaluation that has been done of the healthy relationship prevention curricula that are out there, and so you might be a little bit out of luck on getting an actual CDC report or something like that. But these folks are in the process of evaluation, so sometimes you can use preliminary evidence to be able to say, you know, I'm working on something not evidence-based but evidence-informed, and that may be the way you go.
Mm-hmm. Gotten quite a number of questions about kind of teen-friendly approaches, offices. I'll take a shot at that and let you respond too, because we've been doing a lot of thinking about this. What would it look like? What would it feel like? We have a number of family justice centers around the country, including the Gateway Center in Portland, Oregon, where they've literally created a teen clubhouse that's in the family justice center. It's literally a garage. It has a basketball court that it opens up to. It's a part of the center that's really very much teen-friendly. The other thing that I'll just mention, and then Julie asked you to respond to it, is one of the things we've been working on at the Verizon Foundation is this whole issue about teens not wanting to talk to adults, not wanting to talk to mandated reporters. And we're going to pilot a teen kind of liaison position that we're going to refer to as the Teen Justice Center Coordinator in our Family Justice Center here in San Diego, where we're going to hire a very young college student to actually be that person. They'll work for a nonprofit. They won't be a mandated reporter. They'll be in a position where they can talk to teens without having to talk to police or prosecutors or anybody else when they come in the door. So for us, that's going to be kind of the teen-friendly approach piece. Is they'll get to text somebody, talk to somebody on the phone, interact on the internet before they show up, and when they do show up, that's who they'll be met by. They won't be walking up to a reception counter, checking in with somebody, giving their identification, and so forth. But I'd love your thoughts about other issues around this kind of making it teen-friendly, making it feel like a place that teens would want to be or somebody that teens would want to talk to.
Okay, one important thing is formality. Very, very formal-looking offices are intimidating to anyone, and especially to young people. So you want to think about how can I make this space comfortable? You know, use comfortable furniture. Color is a big help, especially if you use some bright colors to put things around. Having you know, posters and things on the wall that reflect young people or the issues that young people think about can be very important. I strongly encourage folks, if they in fact are gay-friendly, to have something up, you know, at the beginning when you walk in that indicates that you are gay-friendly, and also have, you know, posters up and things that indicate that you do care and work with these issues. So you don't have to put posters up of Jay-Z or anything like that necessarily, although you may. But, you know, use a lot of the sort of anti-dating violence posters, or, you know, the statutory rape type posters, or the, you know, don't drink and drive posters, anything like that, that, you know, portrays youth and is, you know, to youth. But you're going to have to do more than your office. You're definitely going to have to go out into the community, and I suggest when you do so, you dress informally. If you go in a suit, it's really hard. Yeah. But I know police officers have to wear your stuff. But other folks, it's helpful to just go in jeans.
Yeah, that's good. I do want to mention, because they've been doing it for a very long time, there's a good, we like the 26-week teen program, offender program in Santa Clara County, California, that Judge Eugene Hyman and the whole team there has developed. It is a court-ordered program, though it does take voluntary participation. They have a teen domestic violence court in the juvenile court in Santa Clara County. And you can contact, those of you on the call can contact the Juvenile Probation Department in Santa Clara County to get more information about that curriculum and program. But that's one of the programs that we're particularly supportive of and like. It has the same challenges that Julie mentioned with any other kind of program, but we did want to call that out. Julie, there's a number of other questions that have come in kind of about a whole variety of topics. I'll try to jump through a few of them real quickly if I can here. How do you recommend staff balance confidentiality with mandatory reporting laws? How do you kind of personally balance those issues? Do you see the need to develop a relationship with child welfare? Do you just refer to them, or there's a number of questions kind of around what you've seen as far as how CPS reacts, what your recommendations are for working with CPS. But it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. It is important to develop a relationship with your local CPS and to understand, how they are going to address these cases. And to some extent, that's going to be sort of a live and learn kind of scenario, but you can also talk to them about it. And, they may be able to also think through, how they're going to respond and maybe train their folks to do it, and just never occurred to them kind of thing. So you do need to understand, what's going to happen when I report, and, of course, who exactly I report to. With respect to balancing that with a young person, the way that we balance it is that we understand the extreme need for confidentiality for young people. We are going to be on the side of confidentiality when in doubt. And, we are going to be very clear to young people who they can talk to and have complete confidentiality, and who, they can talk to, and it's going to be a mandatory reporting situation, and allow them to make that choice.
Yeah, that's good. I will mention to all of you listening, we've gotten a lot of suggestions for programs that are on the call that are doing work both in Canada and in the United States. Thank you for sending us those. We are doing a review of curriculum both in the prevention and intervention arena around teens that we will put out a list for all the registrants to this call. So thank you for sending those to Natalia. Natalia will include those when we send out the feedback on this webinar. We'll include that list, and of course Juley's got a lot of resources listed on their website as well, but we will include the programs that we've reviewed for the Verizon Foundation and others that have been sent to us just in the last 20 minutes here, so that all the participants will get a listing of all those programs. So we appreciate that. Just quickly, Juley, there's a couple other things that people have asked about. One is kind of what has been your experience with this whole issue about schools enforcing restraining orders. Are you familiar with the legal issues around that? I know that issue has come up here in San Diego because we get relationship violence related orders for teens in San Diego, and sometimes we get some pushback from the schools about enforcing those orders on the campus. But can you talk a little bit more about that? We've had a number of questions about those.
Sure. We have, done work with schools. We have developed actually a model school policy as well. Takes into account, the federal laws as one person in the school be your champion, because that one person may disappear, and then you're back to square one.
Yeah. There's a number of questions around continuing to come in around this mandatory reporting issue, and are there other ways to be outside of mandatory reporting other than using lawyers or teens. I don't know if you have other thoughts about that. My basic feeling is that most of the time, you know, your first goal is to develop a communication with teens that doesn't involve systems intervention. It's always about relationships and trust. And like I said, we're going down two roads. We are going down the road around the juvenile protection orders and so forth. We're going down the road of teen liaison positions in the San Diego Family Justice Center as kind of as peer mediators, if you will. I don't know if you have other thoughts about that. Obviously, it's an issue that comes up. Generally speaking, we haven't found it to be a major issue because most child welfare systems don't deal with teen relationship violence among two people under the age of 18. They don't have a desire to get terribly involved in that situation. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, Julie, before we wrap up.
You know, you got to get creative. Obviously, look at the list of who's a mandatory reporter and who's not, and there may be some people on your staff who are not. There's always the handy hypothetical, and you also have, you know, the situation depending on how you provide services. But if you're dealing with someone who talks to you on the phone or just texting or whatnot, that they can do it in an anonymous way.
Yeah, that's good. And just to echo what Julie just said, that's been our experience in doing education in the schools in San Diego is we always tell the kids, you know, if you want to talk about a specific situation, just describe it as a hypothetical. And that, just say, hypothetically speaking, if I had a friend that was in this situation or if this happened to somebody I knew, what would happen? What would you do? What do you think should happen? We have found that to be very effective, and even though we know a lot of these hypotheticals are real, it takes us immediately out of the mandatory reporting category. So I do just want to echo what Julie said about that. We've had a lot of success talking to young people with that approach. Julie, any quick closing thoughts? I know we're wrapping up and out of time. We so much appreciate your presentation today and the resources you have to offer to folks, but any closing comments?
I think that the main comment that I will make is to treat teens with the same respect that you would give to any adult, and you know, to try to provide them with, you know, the access that you would hope for any adult. It may be a little surprising to them that they're being treated that way as an adult in terms of, you know, what's being given to them, but it's what they're going to need in order to get through this. They're really not going to respond to someone who wants to take a very paternalistic approach. I will also add, a lot of people get worried about, you know, do we really want all these young people experiencing abuse and not telling their parents? Obviously, you work with any person to help them develop a social support system to get them through the process, and you're going to talk to your, you know, teen about how they could possibly involve their parents or some other adult in their life. And we find that the vast majority of them who didn't want to tell their parents at the beginning are okay with it once, you know, they work with you some. So it's really not the case that vast numbers of these young people are, you know, handling all of this without parental notification. It's really only a few who are in serious danger.
Yeah. Well, Julie, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you for the work that you're doing with breaking the cycle and for your passion for this issue. We so much appreciate you investing the time today. Julie's contact information is on the screen, and you're welcome to email her or to reach out to Break the Cycle in order to get more information or resources. But Julie, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you. I was glad to have the opportunity to do it.
I do want to give a quick shout out to a new book that Gail Strack and I have published that just came out. It was released at our conference in New Orleans called Dream Big, Start Small, and it started out as a second edition of our How to Develop a Family Justice Center model and ended up being a brand new book, really focused on the lessons learned from the 80 family justice centers that have opened and are now operating in the United States and in other parts of the world for that matter. So that's available on our website for those of you that are interested in it. And we have a lot of other resources on our website. As mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and will be available on our website. It will be found in a folder entitled Teen Relationship Violence, and you'll be able to download it, both the audio and the PowerPoint portions of the presentation, to both get information about everything that Juley presented and to get other information available when we send it out after this webinar for all of you, those of you that provided your programs that you're working in. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for the work you do day in and day out, advocating on behalf of both adult and young people who are victims of intimate partner violence. And I think that advocacy piece and your passion for it is really where the future goes. Many years ago, my daughter was a victim of a boy who, quote, liked her, unquote, who became incredibly vicious in harassing her when she was in middle school. And the school didn't pay any attention to it until I, as a parent, paid attention. And then I got friends in the system to advocate for me. And it was that advocacy that ultimately resulted in that boy being removed from school. And he was a boy who had brought a gun to school in the process of threatening my daughter. So you can never underestimate the power of relationship and passion and personal engagement when you're dealing with these situations. And I know Juley's passion has changed the world for so many, both on the local level and on the national level. So thank you, Juley, for your work. Thank you all for everything that you do. Thanks, Natalia and Jennifer, for running this webinar. On behalf of Gail Strack and our whole team at the National Family Justice Center Alliance, this is Casey Gwynn, and we appreciate you. Thanks for joining us today. God bless you in your work.